thing about introductions is you kind of, not sure you even know that person, but you could just stop there. Thank you very much, Laurie. We have known each other for a long time. I've spent time with her and her husband, and I am equally an admirer of the work that Laurie does and of her projections for your future, so I want to say that. A couple other people that I want to acknowledge that, first of all, is Ellen Kessler, who pretty much paved the way for my being here and helped me with all of the logistics. It was a great help. Thank you, Ellen. I don't know if she... Ellen also is taking care of my little dog. I don't know where she's at. My little dog, May May, so I'll introduce her. She's still greeting people, I guess. But anyway, you'll see May May. She's a little support dog. And one of the things I noticed, I'm very, very excited to see, this is the first time in a conference that I have seen that a support dog is in your, I'll call it your serenity suite or comfort room. I'll call it a comfort room. A couple other people that I know, Wes Ryder welcomed me very nicely, and we reviewed the fact that we've known each other for a while. Mike Weaver might be here, but I'm not sure if he's in the room. And of course, Reed Smithdale, who I did not know, but now we'll get to know. Couple things. One is, in terms of starting my career, I like to think that I started in a broom closet. Well, that was my first office, and that was in Broward County, Florida, when I started out as a volunteer in the Department of Mental Health, and wanted very much to be the Consumer Affairs Coordinator, so therefore I was given a little office that in fact had been a broom closet. Probably my favorite office. I did a lot of things in Broward County. I went from there to other cities. I think she mentioned, a few, and landed finally in the state of Delaware, where there had not been any peer services. They didn't even know the word peer or peer support or consumer, oddly enough, because they were right near Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, all the places that were way ahead. But that was great because we could start completely fresh, and that was good for me because that's who I am. I don't try to be anybody else or try to do things that other people have done, but to do them differently and creatively. And in terms of offices, my office at that point looked like a luxury suite because it was a big room. Just so happened. I don't think they thought about it. But I called it my circus tent because in it was colorful curtains and, colorful kinds of trinkets and all kinds of things. And dolls. I collect dolls. So, but I really wasn't going to talk about my accomplishments as a peer specialist or all of the different definitions. I'm going to tell the story of me as a little person and how all of the things that I experienced in my childhood relate to who I am today and how it pushed me into a career that had not yet existed. Also, I want everybody to say, people have already said good morning, but I didn't hear any real passion in it, so let's try it again. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, great. That really makes me feel good. What I'm hoping to do is to have you listen to my story, but to have you listen as if this is your own story. Obviously, it's not the same. There's a pencil and paper. I love that idea because that was an idea I had. So if things occur to you, things that resonate with you, jot them down. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the consumer survivor movement. Many of you may not know that we have a history to us, a civil rights history. I'm going to both talk about it and also show some experiential things in my PowerPoint. Also, I was very happy to see that I did not know that your emphasis was going to be on creativity. How wonderful that is. So part of it is for you to find out how you can be creative as a peer specialist, provider, or just person. And part of what I'll talk about is how you can use the arts and creativity in your practices. And finally, I'm hoping at the end that you can share a little bit about some of your thoughts about how you are being creative in your state or how you hope to be. I don't know how much time we're going to have for that because I definitely want to make sure that you see the PowerPoint. So a couple facts about me, I call them my vital statistics. I'm very confused about definitions. So I would like to say that I'm a person with a diagnosis of, quote, mental illness. I've given several definitions, several diagnoses, as many of you have. But I do think of myself as an early trauma survivor. I'm not sure that I like the word recovery because when I think about words that I use, I think about words that I use with the public. And if I say I'm a person in recovery, they automatically think I'm a person in recovery from substance abuse. Now we've combined the two, which is excellent, and we can say that among ourselves. But when I talk to other people, I might say, well, I'm a person that has had and still has a mental illness, that I'm a person who is working to change the mental health system and also have a story of my own, and a variety of things that I talk about in terms of factual things that they can understand, or that I'm a person with emotional problems that I've had all my life. I'm 75, almost, no, I'm not 75, I'm almost 75 years old, I'm still 74. But you wouldn't have guessed that, right? No, you'd have thought I was like 40. Well, anyway. I like to think that. I act that way. I'm a mother of 3 children. I have a daughter that died 8 years ago, my daughter Wendy, who also had problems with mental illness, severe mental illness. I have 2 sons. I was hoping that my son David would be here because he lives in Greensboro. So I'm very familiar with your state because I've been to Greensboro so many times. I have 2 grandchildren there. And I also have a son, Robert, who lives in Tennessee. I have 16 grandchildren, most of them from my daughter Wendy. I'm a nurse. My sexual orientation is always in question. I'm not sure, I always say I'm a bluebird when I'm asked. I choose to love who I love and don't really like labels of any kind. Then again, I'm usually say I'm a lesbian. My name Bluebird, always people want to know, well, how did you get the name Bluebird? And I always have to stop and say, well, I took that name legally myself. And when I took it, I was thinking of myself as being free, something I had never really been. Something Bluebird really means to me something I'm working towards always. And come to find out that the word Bluebird meant symbol of hope, and the word hope has always been important to me. Also, when you have a name like Bluebird and you go anywhere, to the airport, to the bank, or whatever, and people see your name, they just break out in this smile, and oh, what a pretty name. And you can well imagine that after that, they want to know, well, are you part of the Bluebird Bus Company? Or are you the Bluebird Bakery in Ohio? Are you Native American? And then you might get a letter that says, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Bluebird. So anyway, there's always fun with that. I have a memory problem, so if I stumble over the word and can't find it, I might ask, excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. I might ask one of you to help me out. Finally, I'm a poet. So that's the framework of who I am, my vital statistics. I consider it a life with good times, bad times, sad times, times of intrigue and fascination. That is my life. My mother called me Orphan Annie. I think she did it in fun, not to be serious, and if I remember correctly, she just often called me Annie. She used to pick up things just from anywhere. I don't think she knew the comic strip Annie or Orphan Annie, but she just did it to be funny. Other times she was living in her own vain fantasy world, which did not often include me. I was not an orphan, but I felt like one. I didn't look like one. My grandmother dressed me in the best clothes from Best and Company and little Pollyanna dresses with smocking and lace. She owned a dress shop, and so I had, I looked cute in my dresses. But if you looked in my eyes, you probably noticed that I often had a very sad look. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania where people talked about everybody's business, but they never talked about mental illness. It was also a town that did not have mental health services. I don't remember ever hearing about a psychiatrist being in town. People's problems were solved by themselves. A Pennsylvania Dutch way of thinking was you pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps. People's problems got solved at home and often overlooked. They were thought to have bad nerves. Anybody remember that? Or you had a nervous breakdown. But they never really talked about causes. You just had bad nerves or a nervous breakdown. Things happened. Parents spanked. Girls were raped. Children neglected. But often everything looked good on the surface. Trauma was not talked about. Even today, we know that. It's also an experience. My family doctor treated me for hyperactivity, although the term ADD or ADHD or all of the acronyms for hyperactivity for I took phenobarbital for agitation, iron tablets for anemia, tonics for my appetite. I was anorexic and skinny little girl. Anybody remember Geritol? Yeah. Okay. And often I would not eat. I was very underweight. My father said I was 2 toothpicks and an olive, but that was the most familial and fun kind of experience I had with my father. Most of it was more like, eat your asparagus, or I'll get the strap. A big, thick strap with a silver buckle that I experienced too often. I got so that I ran from the table and down the fire escape, which led from my bedroom. Fire escape? Escape, really, for me. I was terrified of my father. At school, I was a teacher's nightmare. I did or could not pay attention, and I talked too much. I was a slow learner, though I got mostly N's for normal. Our was not A's and B's, but was outstanding, N for normal, I for improvement needed, and of course F for failure. So I was able to pass, and the only outstanding I got was for my singing, because I had a very good singing voice. My second grade teacher put me in the corner, desk and all, from other classmates and from herself. I had heard that my kindergarten teacher was fired because she had used corporal punishment on me. I only remember her name, Miss Young, maybe a ruler hitting my wrist. Another problem I had was wetting my pants, probably noticeable to teachers and other kids. I just couldn't stop to go to the bathroom. My mother didn't know what to do, and often, even after reading the comments on my report cards, filled with what a problem child I was, she either didn't comprehend or ignored the comments. Teenage years didn't get any better. I wrote letters to God in my journal in which I wrote pleading with him or her, "Dear God, please help me, or please just let me die." My mother found it too morbid and depressing, she said, without asking any questions and saying nothing more about it. I had long since felt like a non-person, but one day in the kitchen, my mother noticed I was looking like a zombie. "You don't look right," she said. "You look like a dead person." I did feel that way, walking slowly, methodically, unfocused, buttoned up sweaters to the chin. My voice got tight, one of the major assets that I had. Eventually, my speaking voice would also be affected. Can any of you relate to any of this? Some nodding your heads. I often find that people that tell their stories tell them from when they had the breakdown, which usually is in the teenage years. But I seldom hear people talk about their early childhood, so I especially wanted to do that because I felt like I could see who I was as an early child that also related to who I was to become. So being a sad person was not all who I was. I was a survivor early on, and to be a survivor meant that I had to find things that made me feel alive and worthy. I organized one project after another, starting and leading a junior choir, me leading part of Fairest Lord Jesus. I was going to sing a little bit of Fairest Lord Jesus. All of you know that. It's sort of religious, but Fairest Lord, oh, you're supposed to sing, you know. Fairest Lord Jesus, ruler of, nobody wants to sing. That's okay. I just really wanted to show you that I learned, I just had this feeling of leading and directing, so that was that point. I sold Christmas cards from the Cheerful Card Company. A big box arrived every year, I think starting when I was about 10 or 11. I went all over town knocking on doors, and I loved my Christmas cards. I loved the feeling of them. I just loved my Christmas cards. But I also liked people that I met when I was selling my cards, and it was one of the times that I felt like I was finding out how other people lived in their houses. And I made some of these people feel like they were part of my family. Something I would do throughout my whole life was looking for a mother and looking for a family to relate to me, to love me. The Cheerful Card Company kept sending boxes every year, even if I didn't want them to come. When my mother shuddered, "Oh no, not another box of cheerful cards." And the box took up most of my small bedroom. I found other orphans, or almost like orphans, like me, to make friends with. Little Edith, she was 5 when I was 10, was from a large family who lived in Apple Alley behind our apartment. Her mother had a baby every year. Many of them were taken away. Little Edith went with me everywhere. She went with me to my piano recitals when my mother didn't go, to the park, on walks. Can you imagine me with little Edith walking? To parks, on walks, holding my hand. I thought little Edith was my little girl. I loved the people who lived in Apple Alley, and I intend to write a book of poems called the Apple Alley poems, the people who lived in Apple Alley. People who were marginalized and who lived interesting stories like my own. I babysat for 2 women who went to play bingo every Friday night. One of them couldn't read or write, and I sat down and helped her write a letter to her husband who was in prison. My father said, "They're not playing bingo, Gayle. They're prostitutes." "No, Daddy, they are not prostitutes." I said it really didn't matter to me. I loved them both. Up to this day, I have no idea whether that really doesn't matter. Not yet an activist, I knew when people's rights were being violated. They were poor, overlooked, in trouble, gossiped about, discriminated against, or often of a different race. I felt like I knew them like I knew myself. All the time, I had another side to me, the sweet little girl, taking various lessons that my grandmother gave me, paid for, pen pals I wrote to, children of my grandmother's friends, visits to my nanny and pop-up, taking a train and waving to the conductor every Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. He was like one of my friends. He always waved to me. But I also got used to taking the train, and the first stop was Percy, Pennsylvania, where my nanny and pop-up lived, and I would walk. It's a couple miles down to their house, but taking the train was an early experience that I would love forever in terms of my love for travel. I went to nursing school and graduated, but I almost didn't make it. Not only was I observed occasionally and taken to a psychologist's office, at which time I minimized my difficulties and my problems. 3 months before graduation, I got pregnant. I never thought of myself getting pregnant. Little skinny me, thoughts of being ill my whole life. The baby would be an interracial child. The father of the baby not in the least bit interested, though our relationship was consensual. I kept it a secret and wondered what I should do. How can I get help? Where should I go? I decided to write a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King. I already had it planned that I would have my baby down south. Maybe a black family would take me in. I would start a daycare center for children of different races, was already planted in my mind. I received a letter almost immediately, several days later, from Dr. King. His secretary, Dora McDonald, said that it was one of the most touching letters he had ever received, and that I would hear from Esther Turner, a white member of Ebenezer Church, the only white member of the church at that time. Ultimately, I agreed to have an abortion due to family pressure. Also, I wasn't sure that I was mature enough to raise a child on my own. But I still decided to go to Atlanta, and it was through Esther Turner, the woman Dr. King referred me to, that I met the King family. First, Coretta and her children, Yoki, Marty, Dexter, and Bunny. I became a regular visitor. Or as I thought of it, I felt like I was a member of the family. I stayed there on occasion. I took the children to cultural events, to fun places like the zoo, and once had the experience of trying to sit down at a soda fountain, was told we could not sit at that soda fountain. Well, of course, I never said that this was the King family. Yoki said, let's just go, don't pay any attention. So being there, I always felt like, or absorbed what was going on in the house, phone calls coming in, who was calling today, what was interesting, what was challenging. I absorbed sounds, particularly at church, listening to Daddy King say, "Make it plain, make it plain, Martin, make it plain." Then listening to Dr. King preach words. I couldn't repeat those words. I wasn't always able to listen, a difficulty that I would have my entire life. I continued to get by until I later got married and had children of my own. It is a mistake to think that with little inner strength you have some left over to give to others, particularly your children. It was during their early years that I started seeing psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, got up in the morning, 4 a.m, this was in Atlanta, to go to a kind of a scream therapy. Dr. Arthur Janov wrote a book about primal therapy. Thank you, whoever said that. That's right, excellent. And so anyway, I did that. I was diagnosed with depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, ultimately paranoid schizophrenia. Antidepressants help, but not enough. After doing some research, I went clear across country when I was so withdrawn and depressed, negative, and also regressed. I found a social worker, Jackie Schiff, who wrote a book called All My Children. Does that ring a bell with anybody? All My Children, Jackie Schiff? Okay, that goes back a little, in the 70s. This was now in the 70s. She had a reparenting program in which she cared for people, she called them her kids, her children, who had been impossible to treat by other psychiatrists. She was a social worker. I was sure this woman who bottle-fed and even breastfed her children was my miracle mother and family that I so looked for. What was supposed to be a psychiatric alternative turned out to be an abusive family. And finally, this so-called, in quotes, miracle worker was banned from the country because one of her children had died in a bathtub. I spent 6 months there, and then I was back to being lost again. It was during this time that I found a group of people who had been institutionalized and discharged in masses because of new legislation that did not allow any more for long periods of hospitalization. This was in the late 60s, early 70s. These were people who had been abused by psychiatry, and I say they had been abused, not like they had felt like they had been abused. They were organizing to protest, to demand changes, and to demand their civil rights. Though they were militant, they also thought about the alternatives. What would they put in place? And they began to create self-help alternatives that would later become or be called, and even today, we still have programs that are called drop-in centers. More likely now they're called wellness centers, but that is when they got started. And people who started these drop-in centers were people who were living on Social Security. They had been ex-patients, and they met in libraries, in homes, in wherever it is that they could find a place, but they had the beginning of peer support. The beginning of what we called, and I still call, the consumer survivor movement, and I think Laurie also called it that. So this was the time in 1970s. Actually, they also called themselves ex-inmates. They felt like they had been imprisoned, and they felt like the people who cared for them were their jailers. Let's see. When they found each other, and when this started, they found like they had similar stories, that pretty much the story that one person had, another person had experienced almost the same things. And these included things like shock treatment was very common. People had been restrained and secluded sometimes for days and weeks. Some of them had been sheeted in cold packs or given insulin therapy. Their parents had often hospitalized them against their will, sometimes for reasons that were just unbelievable. I could tell you some stories. I knew a lot of their experiences because, from a different perspective, being a psychiatric nurse by this time, I had also trained at Byberry State Hospital in 1962, where I remembered women lined up in showers, patients pacing in day rooms aimlessly, staff not engaged with them, and no one caring whether they were engaged with them or not. So when I got involved with the persons that are now the militant movement, who then started an organization called the Network Against Psychiatric Assault, I then was also working as a psychiatric nurse. As you can imagine, I really wasn't the fit that they were looking for. So I didn't exactly belong to this movement either, as I had not belonged to other places. But also, I felt like this was a place where I belonged, and I continued to be part of their movement. And a couple things that I did. Let me just. What time do we have? What time? 9 what? 52. Okay, and we have till 10:30. Is that right? Is that right? 10:30, I think, yeah. Okay. I just want to know because I want to make sure that I get to the PowerPoint, which I know you're going to enjoy. But I want to tell you about a couple demonstrations that I participated in. One of them was a 30-day sit-in and sleep-in at Governor Jerry Brown's office, and I'm going to show you an illustration of that, he's now the governor of California again. This was in California, and for some reason he allowed us. We all had sleeping bags lined up in a foyer or hallway or room, And every day there were meetings, and mostly they were focused on the people who were dying in institutions of which there was no investigations. Also because they had been used, people were being used as unpaid labor. And so it did get the attention. There were changes made as a result of those meetings. One time, and this is kind of fun if you want to think of it that way, we had a demonstration at St. Mary's Cathedral. And somebody had to play the role of Jesus Christ, because and so I was selected because I was small. I was placed in sheets and a wig of whatever, and carried down the aisle with people who played the roles, or ex-patients who played the roles of a psychiatrist and nurses, and all dressed up. And we went down the aisle during benediction and went out. Well, of course, nobody attending church that day had any idea why we were doing this. It was kind of abstract. But after they came out, they were given a narrative that said, if Jesus Christ were here today, would he be considered paranoid? And also they learned that St. Mary's Cathedral, the church, was giving money to St. Mary's Hospital, where they were still sheeting people. So that was the emphasis. None of us got, we all had a quarter or something in our pockets in case we got carried away. But anyway, I always like to think that one time in my life I, was Jesus Christ. Anyway, that's whatever. The other thing that happened during this time is there were conferences, and they were called Human Rights Against Psychiatric Oppression. And they were held on campgrounds, they were held on college campuses. All of us were poor, and we got there. Some of these were in Florida, I remember. Sally Zinman was one of the first people. Some of you who know about this movement may know her name. Anybody remember or know Sally Zinman's name? Wes does. Okay, two, yeah. Anyway, she's still talking. She is almost 80 years old, and she was the keynote speaker at the INAPS conference, that was held recently in Arizona. So she's quite amazing. She still goes to alternative conferences. Still 5 feet. Huh? Still 5 feet. Oh my goodness, yes. She's a tiny little thing. But anyway, everybody, was poor. They were, existing or living on Social Security. And they got there by buses, by trains, by hitchhiking, getting together in a car. All these, it was a very common. People that were very passionate were sure to get there no matter how it took. And I also remember taking buses. I remember one time that one of these gatherings was held in Philadelphia. We had Bryn Mawr College campus or dormitory that we used. And the funny part about that, and even I hesitate to say this is true, but I know it's true, is that I was hitchhiking. Here I am in my 30s, I don't know how old I was, 30s or something, and hitchhiking. And I got in somebody's car, and I never asked where they were going. So I wound up in Asheville, North Carolina, instead of Philadelphia. Of course, I had to get out, and I remember the police helping me get on a bus, and I got to Philadelphia. The other thing about these gatherings or conferences is that, depending on where they were held, always included a demonstration in the town. I remember in Burlington, in Philadelphia, we marched down Broad Street and we landed at Eli Lilly. And we had a microphone, and people got up and told their stories. And I just remember people looking down from Eli Lilly Company, the upper stories, like, what is this? Nobody had any idea what we were talking about. But the important thing that was really going on was that people were developing courage. And each person that got up, and each time this happened, people began to feel more confident, and maybe they were beginning to believe and be able to tell their stories. So this was the beginning of people telling recovery stories. Even though their issues were frequently against psychiatry or against the drugs that were being given or made at Eli Lilly and Company. All right, well then I'm going to end with the fact that the kind of some of the years went by and we're now at 1986. And by this time the federal government had noticed, this is the Center for Mental Health Services in Washington, that wow, all these people were running their own little programs, and they were doing it only on their SSI. They were not getting any funds to run these programs, and yet they still happened, and many people went and were, quote, in recovery. So they began to have us sitting at decision-making tables. We had dialogues on involuntary and versus voluntary treatment. All kinds of things happened, and they also had demonstration grants where they researched the value of drop-in centers. And they also funded the first alternatives conference that was held in Baltimore with 300 people attending. And this was the first time that not just people that were against psychiatry, but also people who believed in their mental health services. They were positive about them. So many people who were part of the early movement totally disagreed with this and separated. But there was the beginning of combining, of people being included no matter what their ideology or their thoughts were or how they stood with themselves. So I think that's where I'm going to stop. Let me just, okay, yeah. I think, let me just say also that alternatives conferences are now in their, anybody know? I think we had the 25th anniversary. It might be up to 30. I'm not sure, but every year these conferences happen or take place in different states of the United States. We now have 5 technical assistance centers that are funded by the federal government, and they take turns sponsoring or organizing these conferences. How many people know about alternatives and or have attended? Okay. All right, some of you have. How many, let me have the hands of how many attended an alternatives conference. Okay, great. I'm trying to think if we ever had one in North Carolina. I don't think so. We had one in Tennessee, Atlanta, West Virginia, Kansas, Missouri, Florida several times, I think, Arizona, California a number of times, Oregon, Portland, Oregon. So at some point we have to have one of these conferences in North Carolina, and many more of your hands would really go up. And oh, no, let me just say, see, I'm sorry, confusion, but this last year might have been the last alternatives conference. Maybe some of you know that the politics nationally has changed considerably to become extremely conservative. And some of our concerns and our programs may or may not be funded, and alternatives being one of them, which will be sad, but there's people trying to organize and get other funding. So I'm pretty sure you'll be hearing about it. All right, let's go to a little more fun. I hope was my story too sad? Oh, all right, good. I don't want anybody leaving here in tears. And you know, my life is pretty good. You know, I do want to say this, that I have never really recovered, and all of you know that, but I still have these feelings of like I'm out there and I'm not quite here with it. I didn't hear voices, but I hear this constant negativity that goes through my head. I'm not feeling it now, by the way. You're a great group, and a lot of people supported me when I first came. So I feel good, but that hasn't always been true, and I've spoken at many conferences, sometimes almost with tears going down my eyes or feeling totally not confident and terrified. So that terror that I had with my father continued, and there's things that I'm still frightened of, and I'm still terrified of. Being rejected by people, wanting to stay home. Now I'm retired, by the way. I forgot. Yeah, give me a hand. I'm retired. And there's a little sign here that says, let's see, the traveling wayfaring artist. I have been dreaming forever of, having an RV and traveling around the country, and people can just bring me in, and I'll stay at your house. I've stayed at Laurie's house, so we've already done this, and and spend time with people in different settings, in different communities, and share creativity. Really, is to share creativity. All right, now let's see. Oh, this is the first time I've had. I usually have to go like that, to see where we're at with the slides, but I have it right in front of me. So thank you, and thank you. I don't know your name back there, my logistical person. So anyway, I did this slide. I don't remember what year it was that they created the wellness chart, or the wellness circle, or the wellness mandala almost. And so they talked about they created 8 dimensions of wellness. And as you can see, I think you can see them: emotional, financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual. And guess where creativity landed? In intellectual. And it's like, what? Because I think of creativity as being spontaneous. I wasn't part of doing this. I was part of a lot of things at the federal level, but I wasn't sitting when they created this. So I had quite a fuss about this, and because I felt like creativity really needed to be the 9th dimension of wellness. It needed to have its own place. And finally I decided, well, creativity really goes with all of them. So that's creativity is everywhere. But I took offense and continue to take offense that it's part of the intellectual piece. Okay, now, and I don't want to spend too much time, but there was a campaign, 2010, so that's when that chart was created. So they created the wellness campaign because people with mental illnesses usually die 25 years earlier than most people. So it addresses all the parts of a person's life in hopes of increasing their life expectancy by 10 years. Art and creativity healing can be a form of communication, a self-help approach to overcoming obstacles, focuses on feelings, thoughts, and ideas, lets us express things we cannot express in words, and I like that idea particularly, and comes directly from our imagination. The focus that I have on creativity and the work that I do is always people telling their stories through art. So, I mean, there's creativity, there's all kinds of things that people can do that are creative, and that's great. I often talk about that too, but where I like to think is how people can use creativity and see a reflection of themselves, is to see their story, is to be able to put it on paper, which is sometimes easier to do than expressing it in words. So art was used in 1970s, and this of course goes back to when the consumer movement was started. And I often thought that art was reflected in posters, newsletters. They did the Network Against Psychiatric Assault put out a newsletter called Madness Network News that went out for, I think, 10 or 15 years. The byline on it was, "All the fits that's news to print." Chants, songs, music, poetry. So here's a slide on one of our marches, and again, even I said that we did this when we had the earlier conferences, but also from Alternatives Conference, there was always a big march. Oh no, this actually went back to the early marches. I like the sign in the middle that says, "We'd rather be mad with the truth than sane with lies." So everybody had their posters that represented their particular, isn't life shocking, you know? So they were creative, artistic. Okay. So this is a cover of Madness Network News. The artist, Tanya Temkin, was part of the movement at that time. She went on to work in a disability organization. So she kind of left this particular work. I love this piece that she did because you can look at it for a long time and continue to get things out of it. What I interpreted was there's a little narrow doorway at the bottom right, and nobody could get out of it. And some women were angry and powerful, and other women were in despair or sad and frightened. So you see that this was also the women's issue, which each of the issues had a different emphasis or focus or different, yeah. So this is a photograph of, or an issue of Madness Network News of people that were part of the sleep-in at Governor Jerry Brown's office. And I'm in this picture. Can you see me? Let's see, right below the guy with the beard, who also happens to be Leonard Frank, and I'm going to mention him. I have a little scarf around my neck. Do you all see me? So.
Gayle was Bonnie Shell. She was involved in some of this in California too. Do you know if she was at that event?
Bonnie, I'm going to mention her name too. Bonnie, I don't think was involved just yet, but she was in Santa Cruz, so she definitely was an early survivor and organized and ran a program for a long time. I think that still goes on. I don't know what it's called now, but it was a drop-in center with an emphasis on creativity, and that was like one of the first that had that. Now, this is Leonard Frank, and he was one of the founders and spokespersons for the ex-patient movement. He was one of two people. Wade Hudson was the other. And Leonard, if you were ever to read his psychiatric records, which he was able to get, read day to day to day. Leonard refuses to have his, sorry. Gosh, I am 74. Day after day after day, it related to whether or not he would eat meat because he was a vegetarian. Nobody in the institution was a vegetarian. And also he had long hair, and that's why his parents put him in the institution in the first place. And there was nothing about his behavior, about what he was doing, about whether he was a writer, about what his strengths were, but always, refuses to eat, or, his hair. It was amazing. So he wrote a book called The History of Shock Treatment. He died just maybe 2 years ago. He was one of the people also that didn't join our later. He never went to an Alternatives, but he also wrote a book on quotes, a huge book on quotes. So he wasn't just focused on psychiatry, anti-psychiatry, as I should say. So this is Howie the Harp. Howie the Harp was one of my very best friends. He's considered our hero. I like to call him a folk hero, and he also called us crazy folk. So actually my favorite term for who we are is crazy folk, because I think it's a creative way of saying who we are. But he lived being a crazy folk, and he had been hospitalized as a teenager, and was homeless. And all his life he continued to dress as a homeless person. Not, I mean, he was clean and everything, but he had big shoes on that represented himself as he was in the past. So he said, crazy folk, as he called us, are the most talented people in the galaxy. Instead of diagnosing, locking up, and treating us, the world should recognize our true worth and support our talents, creativity, and sensitivity. Howie carried a harmonica with him everywhere to make music, mediate conflict, and create peace. One of the things, he was the MC of our early talent shows at Alternatives. We always had a talent show, and that's where I came in with my leadership, is organizing the talent shows. Anybody have a cane that's nearby? No, nobody has a cane. All right. I'm going to have to pretend. Oh, okay. The reason I need it is because Howie the Harp did something always when he got up on stage. He walked with a cane. He also carried a harmonica, and that's another story. So this is something he did, and it was, everybody knew this phrase. I'm going to get you to say it. And of course, I can't be Howie. I'd like to be Howie, but I can't be. So the question is, what am I doing? The answer is raising Cain. All right. Are you ready? What am I doing? All right, I heard you. That's what he would do. And, he was great. He was a humorous kind of guy. When he got up and introduced everybody that came on stage, he always had something funny to say about them. His harmonica, I don't know what we're doing on time, but I just want to tell you this. He got it, Psychiatric had given him a harmonica when he was in a hospital, and I think it was also when he was being put in seclusion room, so he began to play the harmonica. And that also was his, what would you call it, his totem, something he carried everywhere. What's the word for? A
wellness tool.
What?
A wellness tool.
Well, his wellness tool. All right, there you go. Great. That was his wellness tool. But he got very, very good at playing the harmonica too. He would, after we had the talent shows, he and other instrumental, band people would get together in the hallways and be playing until 3 a.m. Okay, let's see. This.
Got 15 more minutes.
Oh, good. All right. Thank you. All right. Sybil Noble is from Kansas City, Missouri, and she is a well-known artist now. She is the only person that we know of that got an Eli Lilly scholarship to study art and to obtain her MFA. She also attended a lot of the demonstrations and was an early organizer. 1980s, we had talent shows, drop-in centers, arts organizations, a few, we have a number of them in the country now, not a lot though. Self-help research projects, artists, and media projects. This is a slide of Jean Campbell. Jean was the person who was a researcher in the country, and way back when in 1987, she developed a research project that was the first that we know of where clients participated in the research and who did the interviews. As a result of the project, 61% of clients, they use the word clients in California, they still do, stated creativity was essential to their well-being, and 24% stated they lacked creativity in their lives. And that was a painting that she did, Alone and Waiting. The Awakenings Review is and continues, so if anybody is a writer and would like to send something into the Awakenings Review. Robert London started this in 2002 and continues to publish this literary review. But there's also the Awakenings Project, which is an art project, and which does, well, I think they have a program or a space where people can come and do art, and they do a number of exhibits every year. They are in Elgin, Illinois. This is a picture of of some of the performers at the talent show. Anybody recognize in the middle who that is? She's from North Carolina, Asheville. Where are the Asheville people? Bonnie Shell. That's Bonnie. You know, she looks different today, right? So, but that was Bonnie Shell, and she helped me organize a lot of these talent shows. And always, she's an amazing poet. If Asheville hopefully knows who she is, and I visited her in the last year. These are some of the artists that are healing themselves with art, and also speaking to the public. Mike Skinner was a musician before he had a breakdown. He now puts out a newsletter called The Surviving Spirit. There's a website you can access, and he has produced several CDs of his music. He's a frequent player, performer at alternatives and some conferences in the Northeast in New York. Sharon Wise. Have any of you been to Sharon Wise's trainings in North Carolina? Anybody? Oh, Wes. Okay, great. Yeah, because she said she went to Cardinal. And she said she's come to North Carolina many times. But anyway, Sharon is a multi-performer. She does a dance. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, what did you say? Oh, 10 minutes. Okay. If you get a chance to look, she says that things I can't say in words, I can say through my art. This is Mark Davis, who created an act called Misaltered States. This, of course, is a he, and he presented at one of our alternatives where he started out in a fur coat, then a ballroom gown, and then finally his or her bathing suit. And but he speaks on issues of HIV and also suicide. He's a big advocate. Jerome Lawrence is an artist in Georgia, and his paintings are auctioned at the Carter Center, the annual gathering at the Carter Center. I think his last painting went for something like $20,000. This is Meghan Collie from Portland, Oregon. She's quite amazing. This one on the left, I just dearly love her hugging form. And the lotus with sparks. She's now a director of a big behavioral health agency. Mike Mack is known to family members and doing a skit that he calls Hearing Voices in regards to his mother. Amazing story. Okay, now I'm going to get into, I'm really going to have to, some of you might want to talk to me later, but Christine Elvidge is a peer specialist in, Springfield, Massachusetts? Anyway, Illinois, Springfield, Illinois. And she puts quotes on photographs that she did. And when you go into Springfield State Hospital, there's a whole wall of her photographs. Are really beautiful. So that's just one idea. That is in lobbies in hospitals, lobbies in your programs. You can do something with art. This is Tony Wright from Baltimore, Maryland, who's an artist but also a director of On Our Own in Baltimore. Amy Smith, is also an artist, and she's an activist and also an organizer, and she's in Denver, Colorado. Okay, now these are special projects. In 2000, I got funds to do a guidebook on the arts. It's called Reaching Across with the Arts. It's still it contains all kinds of ideas that you can do with the arts. This is a project that has traveled all over the country. It's called Pillows of Unrest, although now it's called Pillows of Recovery. It's painting on pillowcases or using markers, and where people tell their stories on pillowcases. This went to Fulton, Missouri, and they did the Fulton State Hospital, which is a forensic hospital in Missouri. They did a big project with the pillowcase project. This is the cemetery project in Milledgeville. I'm not sure which, beautified cemeteries where they found unmarked grave sites. And now many cities, many states have followed that. I don't know about North Carolina, but many states have beautified old grave sites. I'm not sure if SIDE still exists. It's in Missouri. It was a program in Missouri, but they did a quilt project, which I thought was really nice and focused a lot on butterflies. Second Step Players is a theater group. Years ago, there were a lot of theater groups all over the country, and they were funded, but this is one that survived many years. And they write original material, they perform all over the Northeast, and they now have received grants to do advocacy and art projects. They've just done a lot of different things. And there's the website for that. But almost all of these, you can put the names of the program, just put it in Google. It's great for me. I don't have to, know the website all the time. I can just put it in. So some of the wellness techniques, creativity, creatively, using things creatively, are hopefully things maybe you've thought about. Drum circles are very popular. Comfort rooms, I do a whole training on developing comfort rooms, drop-in centers. This is a project that we did when I was in Wilmington, Delaware, 5 minutes, okay? With balloons up in the air, and again, kind of a recovery project. This is the Hands Project. For those of you that want to do art, come to my workshop tomorrow. This is a fun project, and again, it's putting recovery or part of your story, creating a story with your hands. Hope Tote is wonderful. If you're working in a hospital setting, we created Hope Totes, which were given to people on admission. Things that went in the Hope Tote had to be carefully screened, of course. We made a brochure that welcome, I'm not sure if you can say welcome, but it was a welcome, and other items that made them feel more comfortable. We also had a peer whose job it was to just welcome people, and I think they're still doing it. We had the Hope Totes made. This is another picture of the balloons. This is a trauma booklet that we created with a very, very simply written trauma booklet. Create your own recovery quote. So I imagine yesterday, or even what you were asked to do today, has to do, or even your bulletin board has to do with putting up your recovery quotes. In Wilmington, Delaware, we have an amazing project called the Creative Vision Factory, and they got $20,000 to do a mural. Now they're doing other murals in the city with, I can't think of the word, but anyway. This is an arts postcard project that they did from the Creative Vision Factory. It's a program, again, if you want to Google Creative Vision Factory, you'll find out a lot of information about it. Oh, and here I am. This is the end. I have a character that I created along the way. So as I told you, I'm often confused and I have, problems with memory and whatever. So I created Henrietta that just was plain, right out, confused. A little bit relating to Lily Tomlin's act, The Operator, but presented her a number of times. People love her. So I do things like peer specialist training, pioneer dialogues, creativity workshops, keynote addresses, and what I really want to get into in my latter years, hopefully, and now I'm here, I'm there, is to become the Bluebird traveling nomad. So I can't drive long distances, so I'm looking for a companion driver, and then I'll be there. But anyway, but I continue to come. I like being part of what people are doing, being able to share ideas, and I look forward to spending time with you at the rest of the conference. It looks like a great conference, so thank you so much, everybody.